The historic clipper is still unknown. Here in Scotland there's a particular affection for the ship, which is always described as Clyde-built. But is that strictly true? Bruce Biddulph is the editor of the Shipping Times, and he reveals all in his reporter's notebook.
On Monday, down in London, the Cutty Sark mysteriously went up in flames, causing considerable damage. As the news got out, the world, and I do mean the world, reacted with dismay, disbelief, and even grief at the potential loss of one of the world's most treasured ships. As I wrote my articles for my own website, I felt a growing feeling of anger. Anger that it could be possible the fire had been started deliberately. The police stated the ship was a crime scene. I could not believe anyone would wish to destroy such a beautiful and historic vessel. In many ways, this was personal. If someone had torched my own house, the effect would have been much the same. You see, Cutty Sark is more than just a ship to me, and I believe she's more than just a ship to all of those around the world who, like me, were shocked at what had happened. A ship is something that speaks to all of us. She carries with her the history of her place of birth, the history of her voyages, and the histories of every port she has been to. Few ships survive that can tell a story quite like Cutty Sark's. I myself come from a shipbuilding past. My family had strong connections with the Macmillan shipyard in Dumbarton, and I used to walk past the very spot where the Cutty Sark was built as I made my way to work. But I really became interested in my own heritage much earlier as a kid, when I became aware for the first time that this famous ship in London was actually built on my river, the River Leven. Even though I lived near Dumbarton, had close ties there, for so long all I heard was the Cutty Sark built on the Clyde. It was a revelation to me that the, by comparison, tiny River Leven had constructed such a famous ship. It really did something to me to learn that. I remember as a kid saying to my friends, "Did you know the Cutty Sark was built in Dumbarton?" And many of them would say, "That's rubbish." Well, of course it wasn't rubbish, and I dug deeper into her history. Her owner ordered her from the fledgling firm of Scott and Linton. Jock Willis was very clear what he wanted. He wanted the best tea clipper in the world, nothing less. From the construction of her iron frames, to the choice of woods for her timbers, to her fittings, rigging, everything. Even those who worked on her had to be only the very, very best. Well, it did for poor Scott and Linton. After her launch in 1869, they went out of business, unable to withstand the financial terms or the costs of labour and materials. William Denny, who were situated across the Leven from the woodyard, finished her construction. And so the romance began. She was deployed on the tea trade from China to London. In those days, the races between the clippers to get the first tea to London were as eagerly followed as any football final today. The whole business captured the imagination of the public. Tales of every man straining every muscle, utilising their skills, their knowledge, to get the best out of the best ship, to beat their rivals for the prize of landing the tea first. Sometimes, despite hundreds of miles and days, the results were as nail-biting as a close-run Grand National. Unfortunately, Cutty Sark wasn't the best in this trade. And anyway, the Suez had opened, and the steamship, not hampered by going round the Cape, drastically cut the number of days it took to get the Victorians their beloved tea home. Eventually, she went on to the trade she was to become famous for, the Australian wool trade. This linked her between that colony, New York and the UK, and boy did she break records. She performed like no ship had ever done before. She slashed times between all of her major ports of call, and she became a living legend. Young boys grew up with her beauty, her speed, and her legendary tales, and went to sea because of her. She was a remarkable ship, and from a remarkable shipbuilding river. My stamping ground as a young labourer, and part of my history. As I say, when I learned about her, I dug deeper, and I learned about Dumbarton's shipbuilding history. It too is an extraordinary tale. Beginning in the first decade of the 1800s, Dumbarton and both banks of the Leven became a centre of excellence in the shipbuilding world. Shipbuilders grew and fell and grew again from those early days until, sadly, the end in 1964, when William Denny closed their gates for the last time. And this is where I get really sad the more I think about it. as the world reacts to the fate of this wonderful product of the River Leven. Hardly a whisper comes from Dumbarton as it airbrushes out its own proud past.
Bruce Biddulph and his reporter's notebook. Now, how do you give a rundown area a makeover?